This is Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate third and final part of What If Kid Naruto Got the Cursed Byakugan. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no time, let's start the story.
It felt so good to feel the cool morning breeze brushing against his head, especially since the thick sheets covering the rest of his body kept him warm enough. He could easily pass out for the entire morning in this cozy and comfortable bed. Regretfully, that was the moment the incentive decided to show up. Naruto, gasping for air due to the sudden weight on his stomach, felt the incredible comfort of those fleeting moments vanish into the abyss once more. Gritting his teeth, he slowly opened one blue, darkened eye. Gorgeous lavender orbs met it. They greeted him with, "Ohio. It's morning, time to get up." He tried to roll to the side, but it was ineffective since she was seated so close to his stomach. He finally sat up, moaning reluctantly, and gently moved her away to prevent her from falling. "Thanks for the wake-up call, Hanabi." The youthful Hyuga smiled at him. "I do my best, Naruto." "Nissan. Now hurry up and get dressed. Oni-chan is waiting for you. She says today is important or something." I couldn't hear much. Naruto smiled and ruffled the little Hyuga's long hair, making her puff up her cheeks in mock anger. Yeah, I got it, squirt." But he could tell that she wasn't bothered at all. He had adopted the practice of ruffling her hair for as long as she could remember, after all. It was the one act of brotherly love that she would only accept from him. The young blonde slowly undressed from the bed, removing the nightshirt in the process. He let out a sigh, carefully put it on a nearby rack, and opened a nearby closet to prepare his outfit for the day. Hanabi asked him with a questioning tilt of her head, "Oi, squirt. Are you going to just sit there all day watching me, or are you going to eat?" She answered, "I already ate breakfast with mother. Besides, there's another whole hour before father begins my training. Naruto. Nissan is the one who's late." After responding with a sarcastic sigh, Naruto changed out of his sleeping shorts and put on a pair of black pants. "Do you always have to remind me about being late? And on that topic, can't you find a better way to wake me up? I don't really like it when someone suddenly hops onto my stomach and sits on it as if it were a chair." Hanabi extended 3 small fingers and started pointing at each one, saying, "I've already tried a lot of things. Nudging you doesn't work, prodding you only makes you turn the other way, and when I try yelling at you, you act as if you don't even hear me." Naruto's eye quivered at the recollection. To be honest, he did wake up from those little attempts, but he had always acted as though he was still asleep, waiting for her to leave him alone. But she hadn't stopped since, now that she'd made the decision to try a more successful method of rousing him. Ever since, he had been missing those valuable extra hours of sleep. Naruto put on the gray shirt and socks and said, "Fine, whatever," before leaving. "Come on, I'm sure you've been wanting to do this forever." Hanabi grinned broadly in response. Hinata turned to face her opponent, and gradually let go of her breath. She only needed to briefly access her chakra reserves to summon her family's dujutsu. The young heiress circled her enemy, waiting for any sign of weakness, and dropped into a ready stance. She moved methodically, slowly, and without concern. She had no hesitation or signs of worry on her face. She was at ease. She cannot afford to make a mistake because this is a battle. Her eyes grew wide, and she moved abruptly. As she dashed forward, Hinata avoided blows to her head, neck, and torso. She ducked low, missing another low blow, then launched herself upward. With a forceful blow to her opponent, Hinata released her chakra instantly. She saw right away with her Byakugan that it had hit its mark. After being hit, her opponent faltered and eventually fell to the ground, lifeless. "Well done," Hiyashi said to his daughter while watching from the sidelines, acknowledging her victory over her rival. Hinata expressed her gratitude to her father with a bow before stooping to pick up her opponent. Shinobis used the training puppet, a unique tool, to maintain their physical fitness. It was actually a mannequin that could be programmed, with a seal in the place where a real person's heart would be and charged with chakras. One can set the difficulty of the puppet by writing the kanjis, numbered 1 through 12, on the area where the eyes would be. Hinata defeated a level 5, which was pretty good for a 10-year-old girl. The heiress nodded and made her way back into the complex to get ready for the academy. "Very well. As you have completed this stage, I won't hold you up any further. Do well on today's test, Hinata." She also coincidentally ran into Naruto. The blonde blinked, looking around for a moment, and then smiled at her. He said, "Yo, morning, Hinata." Morning, Naruto-kun. Hinata grinned back, a slight flush to her cheeks. "I take it you and Hanabi had fun?" Naruto let out a grunt. At first glance you wouldn't think she had that much energy. Took me a while to finally get her to stop running. Oh. Or is it that Naruto-kun is simply not as strong as he thinks? Hinata laughed as Naruto mimicked a goldfish by opening and closing his mouth in an almost flawless manner. After the initial shock subsided, Naruto turned away out of embarrassment. I'm kidding. Naturally, Naruto-kun possesses strength. Hinata grinned and turned to leave. Can you wait by the door for a moment? I'll be ready in a minute. Warm satisfaction filled Naruto's chest as he watched her make her way to her room. He had witnessed firsthand over the last few years Hinata's gradual transformation from that shell he had remembered all those years ago. He had always been there to support her and just be there when she genuinely felt like she needed to retreat into that scary corner once more. He could clearly see the changes now. Though Hinata is still reserved, he doubted that characteristic would ever leave her, and to be honest, he was a little afraid of a boisterous Hinata. Although she is still shy, she no longer stammers a lot when speaking. And occasionally, when something wasn't right, she would say something. Naturally, though, the old Hinata remained, and Naruto was genuinely happy that she did. She would still blush a little when he was around, and he would occasionally catch her pressing her fingers together tensely. However, she still possessed the kindness that had always astounded him and the tenacity that she had long since concealed. Naruto smiled and turned to face the door. Hey. No matter what, Hinata is still Hinata. No one can ask for anything different. While waiting for Hinata to arrive and scarfing down an onigiri to quench his hunger, Naruto thought back to his 5 years of residence in the Hyuga clan complex. He felt that he was treated like a member of the family for a full 5 years. He was obviously unaware of the feelings that a true family member would have, but he had had a very happy time with the Hyugas. They respected him and gave him credit for his existence. It's more than he could have imagined back when he was just a lonely kid trying to fit in. Naruto discovered that he was now reluctant to part from the Hyugas as he thought back on them and the pleasant memories they brought. After all those happy memories, he could still recall what he had said in the hospital all those years ago. He consented to be the Hyugas' ward, but he had also stated that he would be free to leave the clan and look for his own place to live as soon as he graduated and became a shinobi. Financially, it wasn't impossible. For as long as he could remember, the old Hokage had always given Naruto a monthly stipend, and in the year since his departure, that sum had added up to a sizable sum. After that, he had asked the Hokage to open a bank account where he could deposit all of the money, and for the previous 5 years, the account had been growing steadily thanks to interest. Naturally, Naruto had been depositing the extra cash that he did not require, and at this point, he could confidently declare that he possessed sufficient funds to purchase a spacious apartment for himself. However, the question is not if he could afford it. If he feels like it, then yes. He had a strong mental image of his time spent alone. From then on, he had always wanted to be self-sufficient and never depend on anyone else. Since the Hokage was the first person to ever assist him, he had him to rely on, of course. But even during his time under the Hyugas' care, he had yearned to go and make his own way in the world. It had to do with his diminished sense of self-worth and his shame at having contributed to the extreme suffering of 5 of them. However, Naruto sensed his ambition gradually waning as he became afraid of being alone once more and realized that his own person might be missed if he vanished. There was also a gregarious side to him. He enjoyed being treated like a member of the family. He also enjoyed a relatively easy life. Why would he give up living like this? He discovered that he genuinely enjoyed playing around with the younger sister, who had grown to be just as fond of him as he was for her. He lived with a great friend, and her parents were loving, though one of them struggled to show it. Was all that something he really wanted to leave behind? Ma, this is really nerve-wracking. Naruto sighed, then bit into the last of the onigiri. Can't say I'm looking forward to it as much as I had before. Naruto turned his head and said, looking forward to what? Hinata was standing just outside the hallway, her head cocked inquiringly. He shook his head and smiled. Nah, I was just thinking of the graduation exam and just how fast time seemed to have flown by. That's true. These 5 years seemed to go by so quickly, Hinata said as she carefully put on her boots. And now, we're going to take our graduation exams and become genins. Naruto got up from the counter and opened the door, saying, yeah, come on. After this, we'll be genins for sure. Every student in the class was anxiously awaiting the test that would decide their future in the workforce. Many were hoping to pass, chasing their aspirations of becoming notorious shinobis without considering the consequences of their actions. Others just wanted the highest paying job. They selected it without taking their life expectancy into account. Every student there, regardless of motivation, had the same objective, passing the genin exam. With a sigh, Naruto reclined in his seat. Is it really the case that everyone gets so anxious about these tests? How stupid. You will either understand it or not. You would pass right away if you had the aptitude or sufficiently understood the material. Well, he could see why they were anxious. After all, it's their careers. Hinata, do you think you'll be ready for the exam? At his call, she averted her gaze from the window. Anyo, I think it would be doable. I mean, Iruka. Sensei and Mizuki. Sensei wouldn't be making an exam on things that we haven't learned before, right? Yeah, I guess so. Still, it seems practically everyone in the class is rather nervous. It's like they all forgot today was the exam or something. And knowing you, you'd probably really did forget it was today. Uchiha Sasuke, as usual, was standing behind them, his arms crossed and expression stoic. Naruto and Hinata both turned to face him. Hey. Naruto smiled and moved slightly aside to allow Sasuke to take a seat next to him. Wouldn't you like to know? The Uchiha did not respond, choosing instead to be silent and amuse the blonde. The two Chunin proctors entered at that precise moment as the doors opened, and it was all too well. Iruka smiled and motioned to Mizuki, who carefully set a big crate containing forehead protectors, causing the class to instantly quiet down. Everyone, I assume you all know that today is the culmination of all that you have learned. This exam will be to test your skills and prowess, to determine whether or not you are really worthy of becoming a shinobi. Iruka made a solemn gesture toward the door. Those that can't meet our expectations will be forced to leave the classroom, and either they have to take the academy again or consider any potential wishes in learning to be a ninja, gone. Oh yeah, Naruto thought, sardonically of course. That certainly lifted everyone's spirits. Now that we got that over with, who wants to go first? There was silence throughout the entire class. Many of the students were either overly anxious to take the test in the first place, or they continued to doubt their ability to pass. Alternatively, he preferred not to volunteer himself unless someone else did, in Sasuke's position. Naruto slowly got up from his seat and walked down the steps, now fully aware that almost everyone was staring at him. TCH. Fine, I'll get this over with. Iruka nodded, writing down the results of the first test, then motioned to the door behind him. Naruto paused in front of the door, pivoted, and grinned at the class before entering with Iruka and Mizuki trailing behind. Naruto encountered what might have been the single most absurd-looking obstacle course when he arrived at the testing area. Training puppets strewn across the hall like a tiny army, their blunt weapons cocked to the teeth. The moment Naruto entered, each and every one of them tensed up, adopting stances as though to defend something. Well, don't you think this is a good test for you, Naruto? The blonde felt the sudden impulse to wipe the smile off his face as he looked up at the smiling proctor. If there were 20 or so training puppets trying to KO you, it was obviously a little too good. Iruka. Sensei. Are you a sadist? Mizuki covered his mouth to keep his laughter from coming out. Iruka approached the blonde composedly, as though giving the blonde a lecture. Naruto. Naruto raised his head, anticipating an explanation of the term sadist, and how he was the complete opposite, or something along those lines. What he received was a blow to the skull from a fist. Ow. Iruka. Sensei, what the hell? Iruka smiled and turned to leave, saying, language Naruto. Now the exam is to simply take the scroll that's in the container at the other side of the room. You may use any skills you've learned. You start with a total of 100 points, but they may be docked depending on what mistakes you make. If your points get below 75, then you fail. Below 75? But isn't 70 still passing? Walking up to explain was Mizuki. We base the points as a matter of percentage. If someone were to get below 75% in mission success, do you honestly want to hire that person for missions? There is a minimum of 75, and that's considered generous already. There is an assumption that as time goes on, your percentage rate of success goes up by 5 or 6. Therefore, 75 is the minimum you may have as success. Naruto sighed and gave his head a little scratch. Well, thanks for letting me warm up the stupid puppets. Iruka disregarded that and proceeded to complete the required fields on the score sheet. When he was done, he gave the blonde a nod. Whenever you're ready. With a smile, Naruto bounded forward. The puppets used for training responded right away, while another charged forward with a ninjutsu. One of them knelt down and threw several shurikens. With a flick of his kunai, Naruto blocked 3 of them, dodging the final 4 or so, and vaulted over the puppet that was charging. Grabbing the puppet by its collar as he flew overhead, he used the momentum to launch himself at the other puppets. When another shower of shurikens fell precisely where Naruto was, He dodged out of the way, not caring that it crashed and knocked down a few. The blonde looked thoughtful for a second before springing to her feet and grabbing onto the ceiling. He put his feet on it and ran forward, making sure to pick up a little speed. Kuna is always embedded to where he was a split second earlier, so it was just as well. As a puppet materialized in midair, Naruto thought to himself, this is pretty damn intense for an exercise. Damn it. It wielded a bow staff, launching it with pinpoint strikes from its hands. Once more, Naruto used a kunai to deflect those blows. Then, taking hold of the staff, he jerked it away from the puppet's hands. With that, he took his kunai and drove it straight into the seal's chest compartment. Naruto dropped from the ceiling to join the falling puppet, which had lost its programming. But as soon as he touched down, he leapt back up. Already in response, the puppets were tossing those shurikens at him like playthings. However, when they strike him, they will hurt unbearably. Naruto leapt to the right to dodge another barrage of shurikens, saying, "TCH. Damn it, I'm not going anywhere. These things certainly put up a decent fight, in that case." He immediately began to make hand seals while in midair. Naruto landed hard and slammed his hand down on the floor. Naruto made careful to use the least amount of chakra when saying, "Doden. Jishinshusho." He didn't want to break the earth like he had the last time, after all. However, even with the bare minimum, it was sufficient to yield the intended result. Many of the puppets lost their footing and fell as the ground trembled violently, opening up a wide path. Yosh. With the path ahead of him clear, Naruto shot up to the scroll by applying as much chakra to his legs as he could. In order to conceal his movements, he also made sure to toss some smoke bombs along the route as he ran. It worked well. After that, the scroll was blatantly within his reach and there were no puppets in his way. However, Naruto's senses alerted him to the threat. A big shuriken embedded itself on the spot where he was a moment ago, so he swiftly moved away. The blonde glanced up instantly and saw a second puppet dangling from some kunais. Connected ropes. Odd, this one's pretty smart compared to the rest. The puppet lowered itself and raised its fist at the same moment. With wide eyes, Naruto leapt back out of the way. However, the puppet changed positions, squatting down and then leaping forward to get ready to deliver a spinning kick. Shit. It arrived a bit sooner than he anticipated, and Naruto was only able to shield his head with his arms as the kick made contact. With a sickening crunch, the room shook as Naruto was thrown sideways by the force of the kick. With clenched teeth, he quickly straightened up to evade a barrage of missiles. He turned to face the other puppets in the room and remarked, "Damn. This puppet is higher level. No wonder since it's the last guard. Shit, I have to finish this now." He would need to employ a different jutsu. Once more, Naruto dove into hand seals while avoiding kunais and shurikens. The puppet appeared to be trying to ensure that, at the absolute least, Naruto wouldn't be able to easily hit it with whatever weapon it chose. But this technique didn't care about accuracy. Fuiten. K's no tate. Naruto thrust while putting his palms together. The wind all around him started to pick up speed right away, and soon there was only a wall of air separating him and the puppets. By this point, all of the puppets were standing again, and they started flinging every weapon they owned without stopping when they realized Naruto had already reached the target. However, it was ineffective. Even though the wall of air was only there for 10 seconds, that was enough time for Naruto to grab the scroll as it stopped all projectiles. After losing their treasure, the puppets stopped attacking and remained motionless. Naruto carefully made his way back to the training field's edge, where Iruka and Mizuki were waiting, as the wall of air began to recede. "Well, had it not been for the brief moment that you got hit, I would have given you a perfect score." Iruka laughed. "But well, I suppose no can be that perfect, right? Congratulations Naruto, you've earned your status. You're officially a genin now." With a smile, Naruto thanked the two proctors. Naruto chose to stare at the clock instead of looking at anyone in particular as he left. It was only 15 minutes that he had been in the room. It seemed like an hour passed. With a frustrated grunt, Naruto shoved his hands into his pockets and retreated to his seat. Until he made a detour to pick up a forehead protector along the way, everyone believed he had failed. Right in front of the row where Hinata and Sasuke were standing and observing him, Naruto stopped, the former grinning and the latter raising an eyebrow. The blonde just smiled and gave the exam room a quick thumbs up. "Next," he exclaimed with joy. Though Naruto was not nearly as excited about Sasuke's passing strategy, the other two had also passed the test. Hinata had stated that all she did was use her Byakugan to deflect every weapon that was thrown at her. She hadn't even had to use the ability to take out any of the puppets in order to access the scrolls more quickly than she would have liked. She had barely given the boss guard a second's notice before driving a Juken strike straight into its chest compartment. That was the only exception. She got a perfect score after that, and everything went smoothly. Conversely, Sasuke selected what may have been the simplest and most annoying strategy Naruto had yet heard. The damn Uchiha had waited until the very last moment to leave. After entering, he left after just a minute or so. When asked, Sasuke merely replied that he employed the Uchiha's signature fire technique. Gukakyu no Jutsu, in Kaden. Why did that irritate me? The method was straightforward. A massive fireball. The puppets would have been unable to do anything due to its size alone, and when combined with the lightning fast strike, they would have all been instantly destroyed. However, Sasuke appeared to still lose points. It seems that some of the scroll burned when his flames got too close to it. He was obviously disappointed to lose those few points, but he felt a little better about himself because he still outscored Naruto. Following the exam, Iruka and Mizuki congratulated everyone who had passed. Mizuki went on to tell them that the scrolls they had all received from the exam were a part of their winnings and instructed them to open them. When they did, they encountered an unexpectedly cool method. Konoha's shuriken is ninpo. Based on the description, it appears that the technique involves soaking leaves in chakra. After that, the leaves would harden and the user could shoot them like shurikens with a single motion. It was an incredible gift for Naruto and a real boost to his new genin career. Walking out of the academy with the two following him, the blonde smiled. He pivoted and wildly waved at every street vendor in the process. Hey, how about we commemorate this achievement by having a big giant lunch? Hell, I'll even pay for us all. HMPH. Sasuke averted his gaze. As much as I would love to watch you inhale your food like a vacuum, I have other things to take care of. Unfortunately, I'll have to pass this time. As the Uchiha turned to leave, Naruto gave him a scowl. He muttered, "Damn killjoy. What about you, Hinata? Want to go out to eat?" For some strange reason, the heiress's face blushed, but she, too, shook her head, if a little reluctantly. Anyo, M. Mother asked me to help her with the herbs today. So I'm sorry but I can't go with you. With a low bow of apology, Hinata took off. Naruto watched her leave, slightly irritated that everyone was preoccupied and perplexed by her response. Man. Oh well. Guess I'll just go eat with Shikamaru and Choji then. Naruto put his hands behind his head in a sigh as he got ready to head to the neighborhood barbecue joint. The blonde turned around and arched an eyebrow, saying, "Oh Naruto, I'm glad I managed to catch up to you." Mizuki Sensei was there, fresh out of the academy. What was it that Odd wanted with him? Mizuki Sensei, is there something you need? Appearing to be out of breath, the man stopped right in front of him. That was unusual right then. It was unlike anything he had ever seen Mizuki Sensei do. Was there a problem? Naruto, I don't know how to say this to you, but... Huh? Naruto, someone stole your genin verification sheet. What? The only document proving he was a genin was his genin verification sheet. Not with it, not with him. Mizuki gave a headshake. I don't know who did it, and unfortunately, the exam is already over. I'm sorry but the supervisors won't accept you unless you have that sheet. With his bangs now covering his eyes, Naruto bowed his head. Nobody said anything for a while, and Mizuki just gave Naruto pitying looks. At last, the boy raised his head, a look of helplessness on his face. Isn't there anything that can be done? Mizuki took a step back and considered it. There was just one method. Yes, if you complete at least a C-class mission, even the supervisors will have to accept you as a genin. Mizuki cracked a grin. And after that, the sheets will simply be written in person by him. Then we need to get this mission. Mizuki carefully reached into his shuriken pouch and pulled out an envelope and a brush. As it stands, I don't think there are any that will accept an academy student. Unless they see that sheet, you're still technically a student unless. He wrote a large C in front of the envelope after that. Unless I make the mission myself. What's the mission? It's a simple training exercise like the exam. Your mission is to infiltrate Hokage Sama's administration building and take a scroll that he placed for training. Strictly speaking, he'll be in on it too but will act as per part. This was originally for mid-class genins but I think you can do it. Mizuki nodded and gave Naruto the envelope. So do you agree to it? Naruto grinned and grabbed the envelope, saying, of course, when's the rendezvous point? The old cabin building in the edge of Konoha's northern forest. Yosh, then I'll hurry it up. Mizuki gave a nod. The Chunin couldn't help but smile snidely as Naruto left. In one swift motion, he was going to solve the village's minor issue and obtain a scroll of power. Getting two things done at once. This will make him stronger than ever and gain him more respect in this village. This strategy was foolproof. Hee. Just you wait, you damn fox. You're living on borrowed time now. Mizuki had no idea that Naruto was grinning as evilly as ever. He had his plan ready the moment the Chunin gave his mission. Hee. Watch out, Mizuki. Sensei, you think you're so smart, just wait till I rub this in your face. To be really honest, the person who fell for this trick would have had to be the biggest fool alive, and the only moral thing he could have done would have been to take his own life. When Mizuki arrived at the meeting place, it was already quite dark. Still, it felt like hours that he had been waiting for the hint of a stolen scroll. Anger darkened the Chunin's eyes. Either the boy was simply caught, or he was a little more skilled at espionage than he realized. Should the latter be the case, his whole scheme would collapse. Mizuki cursed to himself as he knelt on top of a branch, waiting for any indication that the boy had survived. Damn it. He'd better have succeeded. He didn't have to wait long, surprisingly. The Chunin became aware of a person's presence when the leaves trembled and the branches rustled with movement. Swiftly drawing a big shuriken from behind him, he readied himself for this intruder. But when the boy turned out to be the intruder, he relaxed. Yo Mizuki. Sensei, that was a lot easier than I thought. Mizuki smiled and extended his arms. And did you get the scroll? With a, yep. Naruto reached back and produced a sizable scroll. The forbidden scroll of seals was indicated there by the written kanjis, indicating that it was the correct one. Mizuki smiled and motioned for the boy to approach. Good job, Naruto. After this, the supervisor will have no choice but to make you a genin. With a sly smile, Naruto threw the scroll to the Chunin. Mizuki grabbed it and held the scroll with a gentle touch. Power was what he had yearned for most of his life. He finally had it within his grasp. Oh Mizuki. Sensei, I forgot something important that I have to tell you. Mizuki turned back to face the blonde, annoyed that someone had interrupted him in the middle of his thought process, and he gave a very harsh, what? Naruto smiled more broadly and extended a finger. Boom. The scroll suddenly came to life, widening the Chunin's eyes. Suddenly, before he could let it drop, the scroll blew up in his arms. The Chunin screamed and writhed in agony, and all of a sudden the forest was silent. After the smoke cleared, it was discovered that Mizuki had third-degree burns on the right side of his face and that his hands had been blown off completely, ending at the wrists. Naruto gave a dismissive shake of his head and gestured with his hands. Instantly, the Hokage and several Chunin guards materialized. With a nod of his head, Sarutobi Hiruzen guided the Chunins towards the traitor. Mizuki, for your crimes in conspiracy, theft, and sabotage, you are to be taken prisoner. The traitor was restrained by sealed talismans while one of the Chunins used a rope to gag him. The Chunin traitor had no choice but to be dragged away by force because he had no means of getting away. But that didn't stop him from attempting. Naruto and Hiruzen observed the Chunin thrashing and writhing in the hands of his captors, waging an insane struggle for freedom. The blonde just shook his head, amazed at how fast the day passed. He had no sympathy for the betrayer. He had never been fond of the Chunin in his years in the academy since he seemed more like a bootlicker than anything else. This act of treason was just one more item on his list of personal grievances. Hiruzen looked down and grinned at the blonde, saying, "Good job, Naruto-kun. You did the village a great service." With a smile, Naruto extended his hands. "That's part of the reward, but where's the other part you promised me, him?" With a laugh, the Sandaime pulled out a little scroll that was probably handwritten by him. "This is the equivalent of a B-rank mission, but because of its secrecy, I am unable to pay your dues. However, I believe this scroll should serve as a good enough payment. It is a technique from the Forbidden Scrolls. The first one, in fact. I am sure that given your enormous chakra reserves, this will serve as useful little technique." "Hey." Naruto bowed to the Hokage while accepting the scroll. "It's a pleasure as always, Gigi." With a smile, Hiruzen ruffled the boy's head and then vanished, probably trailing the Chunin group back as they led the traitor. Before glancing down at the scroll, Naruto maintained his focus on the location where the elderly man had been. Then, jumping down from the tree, Naruto landed close to the ancient cabin, which still had its lantern lit, and used the light to open the scroll. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a group of Junins stood in front of a large crystal ball that displayed a classroom full of recently graduated academy students. So these are the kids that are going to be the new teams? The Junins asked themselves. "Yeah, and you know how it is. Hokage. Sama has initiated the wartime powers, saying that it is better for teams to be well ready in teamwork already. Therefore the students who are most familiar with each other are placed in a team. Kind of kills the purpose of branching out loyalty, doesn't it? It's wartime struggles, can't make anything about it. Word is that a Chunin team was wiped out after a routine recon mission to Rice Country. We'll be needing as much people as possible for this. The massive door that concealed the Junins behind them swung open, revealing the Sandaime Hokage and his two advisors. The old leader and his two old friends approached their respective places of authority, and the Junins instantly snapped to attention. The Hokage nodded to the group after taking a seat and folding his hands on his desk. The room fell silent, waiting for the Hokage to speak. I hope you all have had a chance to see these fresh new genins, as you will all be testing their mettle, to see if they truly have what it takes to become a shinobi. And now, I will ask your opinions. Since there wasn't really anything to say, nobody really spoke. There was no doubt that those genins lacked experience. All of them were still immature. So what was it that Hokage? Sama hoping to find out. Hokage. Sama, if I may. Everyone looked to the back, where Hitaki Kakashi, the seasoned Junin, was leaning against the wall. Presumably, he was among the select few who were permitted to do so in front of their village's most formidable shinobi. With a nod, Sarutobi gestured for Kakashi to proceed. I already have an inkling that I am to be placed as the Junin sensei of Team 7, which this year consists of Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata, and Uzumaki Naruto. The Hokage gestured for him to continue once more. I can only assume that part of the reason is for me to help the young Uchiha learn more about the Sharingan whenever he awakens his. Am I correct? That is part of the reason, yes. Good. What I am asking here is simple. Why am I going to teach him? Everyone would have heard the ensuing silence, which was dense enough to hear a pin drop. Everyone was taken aback. Was Hitaki Kakashi unwilling to pass on his knowledge to the lone surviving Uchiha, a warrior clan of such formidable might? What are you asking, Kakashi? What I am saying is simple. The Uchiha clan keeps extensive records of their Sharingan and other abilities. Activating the Sharingan is the only hard part that Uchiha has. After that, everything else is basically self-taught. There is no need for me to train the Uchiha, as he will already have a great library about the Sharingan. That was followed by an awkward silence. It seems that everyone expected Hitaki Kakashi to have insisted on teaching the final Uchiha in addition to agreeing to it. Rather, he appeared to be a little miffed that he was given the task. As he smoked his long pipe, Hiruzen nodded to himself. Yes. You are indeed correct. It was accurate. There's no doubt that the Uchiha left scrolls explaining everything about their Sharingan. It's reasonable to presume that Uchiha Sasuke will have access to the information in case he needs it. But that's not all he decided when appointing Kakashi as the teacher. The elderly Hokage nodded to Kaharu's seat to his right. The assistant then got up to speak to the group of people in front of her. That part seems to have indeed been for naught, but there is another reason why we chose you specifically for this position. An eyebrow arched by Kakashi. A motive stronger than the Sharingans? As you already know, you are an accomplished shinobi in all three main branches of the ninja arts. Reconnaissance, infiltration, and assassination are all abilities that you are well versed in. Kakashi nodded, even though it wasn't especially flattering to hear that he was a skilled killer. And it is because of that we make you this particular team's instructor. I'm afraid I don't follow. With a sigh, the elderly assistant gestured to her left, where Homura stood up. It has to do with this team's capabilities. As you are aware, the Byakugan is the best reconnaissance dujutsu out there, which makes all Hyugas very good scouts. The Sharingan, while skilled in all three arts, is especially valued for infiltration because of its capacity to mimic movements, which enables users to gather information. Clients also seek out its use of genjutsu for covert operations requiring extreme secrecy. And lastly, Uzumaki's new dujutsu. According to what he has disclosed, this Magen might be the best dujutsu ever for killing someone. It is an amazing weapon to be able to physically avoid obstacles and go straight to the life force of an adversary. A shiver ran through the room as a few of the Junins shifted uneasily. How in the world did a dujutsu this strong come into being? Knowing that your armor, no matter how thick, will be absolutely useless against those eyes was almost terrifying. Okay, I get it. Then, I'll take my leave, Kakashi finally sighed. The copy ninja slid the door behind him and left, and the Hokage did nothing more than nod thoughtfully. Excitement filled the entire classroom as all of the graduating students eagerly awaited their mentor instructors. They had finally come one step closer to becoming true shinobis after 4 years of training. Excited murmurs spread throughout the area as genins started inquiring about their individual senseis. But Naruto paid them all no mind. For now, he was still lost in complete bliss. The Kage Bunshin no Jutsu technique, which the old Hokage had taught him, was essentially such a wonderful gift that, after he had finished reading and practicing it, Naruto was on the verge of losing his mind. Based on the scroll's description, the shadow clone technique employed chakra manipulation to produce solid clones, enabling this particular clone to assume a solid form. It also revealed that every clone had an odd connection to the original that, if broken, would allow the original to know everything that the clone had done and the reverse as well. Naruto had attempted that by creating a clone, sending it on a mission, and then having it dispel itself. He eventually acquired the clone's memories. It had apparently taken hold of an unknown child and given it the worst nipple it had ever experienced before vanishing. As the clones dissipate, Naruto does, in fact, inherit their memories, as evidenced by the flood of memories that comes back to him. He also thought it was interesting that, despite the scroll making it obvious that he could only hope to create the clones by splitting chakra evenly, it never said how much chakra should be split. Thus, using roughly the amount of chakra needed for a high C-rank ninjutsu, Naruto created roughly 3 shadow clones that obeyed his commands despite their extreme independence. But all it had taken to dispel them had been a single blow, strong enough to knock them off their feet. Naruto chose to take things a step further. Using the chakra equivalent of an A-rank technique, he distributed it equally among the 3 shadow clones once more. These were far more resilient, taking almost 14 hits before smoldering to nothing. These clones were undoubtedly more resilient. They were like a super shadow clone. Nay. Naruto-kun. The fair-haired man asked, blinking at the hand waving in front of him. Hinata regarded him with a curious look to his side. Was there a problem? He had been gazing into the distance for a while. Abruptly, Naruto realized he was in a class, awaiting the arrival of his new Junin instructor. The blonde chose to smile sheepishly instead of hitting himself for being so careless. Haha, sorry about that, Hinata. I just wandered off for a second. Hinata laughed. I could see that, but are you really alright? Hinata was about to respond, yeah, I'm fine. There's no need to worry about me, when a plume of smoke appeared out of nowhere, startling some of the children in the front row. Immediately, all eyes were focused on the front, where the thick plumes of smoke started to break up. The smoke parted, revealing a squad of Junins standing alert in front of everyone's shocked eyes. At once there was complete and total silence as everyone straightened up in their seats. Nobody said anything for a while. All the while, the Junins were merely surveying the room, taking in all the new genins that would eventually be their charges. The genins were also fixated on the nearly menacing Junins in front of them, realizing that these experienced warriors would soon assume the roles of captain and teacher. But the quiet was soon broken. Shiranui Genma for Team 1. Hayate Gecko for Team 2. Yamashiro Aoba for Team 3. The groups of genins got up from their seats one by one, following their new teachers outside. Meanwhile, the remaining ones started to become increasingly nervous. This truly is the turning point in their lives. This was their goal all along. And now they've succeeded at last. Yuhi Kurenai for Team 8. Namiyasha Rado for Team 9. Sarutobi Isuma for Team 10. And with that, every student had gone, along with their new teachers. Haruka was the only person left in the class. The 3 genins then departed. Looking around, Sasuke twitched, realizing that they were the only 3 left. Hinata looked at Naruto sympathetically as he groaned across from him. Damn it man, where the hell is our sensei? Gradually, Hyuga Hinako opened her eyes and saw the training garden in front of her. The sound of the running water and the birds' melodic chirping created a serene atmosphere. The fish in the koi pond would only occasionally break the stillness to splash against the surface as they felt the need to move. Even the weather matched the serene mood. The village was bathed in brilliant sunlight with not a cloud in the sky, but when a breeze did blow by, it was incredibly cool. It was the kind of mildly cool weather for which Konoha is especially renowned. And she really enjoyed that kind of temperature. Hanako, what are you doing out here? The matriarch of the Hyuga clan asked as she turned to face her husband Hiyashi. She chuckled back, turning back to face the garden. What am I doing indeed? There was an awkward silence between them as neither of them spoke. She discovered that, even after 4 years, she still felt uneasy in her husband's presence and carried the burden of his betrayal for the sake of raising their daughter. That was a deep wound to her heart. Even though time would hopefully help those wounds heal, the bitter sting of betrayal would never go away. Even now, she found it hard to comprehend how her devoted husband, who was able to show her and their priceless firstborn such incredible love, could also be capable of such severe domestic abuse. And that only intensified the pain of the betrayal. Hanako started to notice that tears were starting to blur her eyes. She quickly ducked her head and wiped those tears away with her yukata's sleeves. "May I sit with you?" The grandmother just nodded and answered in a hushed voice. "Do as you wish." Hiyashi moved to the porch and sat down slowly, keeping enough space between them to be comfortable. He remained silent at first, giving his wife time to gather her thoughts. He simply maintained his forward gaze, allowing her the room she required. He said something after he was certain his wife had calmed down. "I did what I did then out of a weak and fearful heart, even though it's probably true that you will never forgive me. I was already devastated by what was probably going to be your death and how you were taken from me forever. Then, little Hinata appeared, and I was struck by how much she resembled you in terms of appearance as well as personality. I chose to cut off all communication with her in the hopes that she would likewise cut off all communication with me. If that were to happen, she would develop into a very strong member of our clan. It is precisely this same personality that I loved, and yet seeing it on someone else only served to remind me of my loss." Hanako narrowed her eyes fiercely and said, "Is that supposed to excuse your actions?" Tears were slowly coming back, but she did nothing to stop them. "You'd hurt our daughter and made her feel pathetic. Is that how a true parent should act?" Hiyashi remained quiet. "And what about us? Although our marriage was arranged, you had told me that you loved me, that it was a mutual love between us despite its arrangement. Why then? Why would you do so much to harm the culmination of our love? Do we mean nothing to you?" "Enough," he muttered to himself. "Had you been lying to us? Was the Hiyashi Sama that I loved and loved me back merely a mask that you used? Am I nothing but a bearer for an heir? Is that why you did what you did?" "Enough." It was more than a whisper this time. Hanako's heart stopped for a moment in fear as Hiyashi's Byakugan flared with an almost uncontrollable killing intent. No, this was the same Hiyashi that she had loved, but she had only ever seen him once when he went into his fighting mode. Though that would have been plenty, this was more than just him dominating chakras. Hiyashi was enraged. She saw it right away. Her husband's rage flared to the point where it appeared as though he was radiating blue flames from his chakra. Hanako's eyes grew wide with shock and fear. This was the chief of the clan's strength. This was the power Hyuga Hiyashi was carrying around. But as soon as it materialized, it vanished. With his chakra reintegrating into his body, Hiyashi let out a long, cautious stream of breaths gradually. After the last of his earlier fury had passed, he leaned forward a little, his face drenched in perspiration. And Hanako gave her husband a sincere look at that particular moment. She had to admit that ever since she found out about her husband's behavior, she had made a conscious effort to avoid looking into his face and to limit their conversations. She had tried her hardest to distance herself from the man she detested and loved the most for 4 long years. And yet the resentment turned to worry now that she could actually see his face and features. There is no doubt that Hiyashi was ill. Hiyashi's face showed that he was tired and sick, even though many would not notice this because of the amazing aura he emits. He looked much older than he actually was, with lines forming around his mouth and forehead and skin sinking into his cheeks, making him gaunt. He was much thinner than she would have imagined, and his whole body seemed to sag down, as if he no longer had the strength to sit up straight, now that the clan head's familiar aura had vanished for the time being. Hiyashi Sama, she exclaimed, startled. 4 years later, he appeared so weak and defeated. Above all, he didn't resemble the head of a clan at all. Where was that wonderful aura? Where had she met and got to know this Hiyashi? She reached forward almost instinctively, reaching out to touch the face of this man who had seemed so alive. Her fingers, though, never quite made it. Hiyashi got up suddenly, and the aura came back. But that aura seemed almost like a thin piece of paper now that she had the opportunity to see him again, to really look at his features again. She could still make out the remnants of a man who was rapidly losing a lot of his health. Hiyashi Sama, you look so thin, as I should have. The clan had a lot of meetings and administrations, and there wasn't enough time for rest. I didn't know you didn't know because you've been back for 4 years. The matriarch's eyes widened at her husband's tone this time. His words were filled with fatigue, bitterness, and a deep sense of self-loathing above all else. Hanako became suddenly aware of her husband's condition. He was taking his own life. He had been punishing himself for the same length of time if she had been like this for 4 years. It was clear from the way he seemed to blame himself that the man she knew and loved was still there. Hiyashi had always been one of the most compassionate people she had ever met, after all. Hiyashi Sama, she bit her lip, suddenly realizing the potential consequences of her words. Her husband had, if anything, been exacting revenge on himself for previous deeds. That moment, her words could have caused him much more pain. Hiyashi. Sama, you do not look well. Please, rest for the day. Her spouse did not respond. Instead, he just walked slowly back to the hall, ignoring her. She saw something else that she had not seen in the previous 4 years as she watched him, now filled with guilt as well as worry. Hiyashi had a cane with her. Moreover, there was a barely perceptible limp in his gait, suggesting that his strength on one leg was already failing. She was also alarmed by this. Wait, Hiyashi halted, turning away from her. Please, Hiyashi. Sama, I am sorry. I did not know. Please, forgive me and rest. You're only hurting yourself and others. Once more, he remained silent. If not right away. With a deep awareness of the impact her words must have had on him, Hanako lowered her eyes to the ground. At last she noticed that he was facing her, as indicated by the way his feet had turned. She looked up quickly again, only to see her husband staring at her impassively. Hiyashi, Sama, quite quietly, he said, you were right. He averted his gaze once more upon observing her bewilderment. You were correct in your earlier assessment. I was just using you to bear heirs. The man you love doesn't exist. Hanako's body felt like it was made of stone. Was she just his heir apparent? And that is why I took you from the Branch family. There was no other reason other than my need for a ready heir to succeed my position. Hiyashi started walking away slowly. Now if you will excuse me, I still have many meetings to attend. Merely talking to you has already cost me an important agreement between several influential figures. And just like that, he was gone, leaving his wife inconsolable. No, Hanako was aware that her husband was lying to her and that he genuinely loved her and their kids. She knew that he had been quietly carrying out his own penance for the previous 4 years the moment she saw his face and realized how completely exhausted he was. She was unaware of the depth of his self-inflicted agony. However, she did now, and that just made it hurt even more when he rejected her apology. Without warning, Hanako fell to her knees on the wooden floor. She slowly encircled herself in her arms, letting go of a long-held longing for her cherished husband's warmth and affection. But it appeared as though she would never have it again, and this time, she was only to blame for her own situation. She was the one who brought him to this point, and in her stupidity, she destroyed her last hope of making her cherished family whole again. She wept in that peaceful place over and over, her body trembling with the intensity of her grief. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Hiyashi. Sama, I'm so sorry. All Naruto wanted to do at that point was locate their Junin-sensei and give him the worst beating he would ever receive in his lifetime. It was getting on for 2 hours now. How much longer will they have to wait because of this damn Junin? Initially, Naruto had made the decision to return to the teachings of Chiriku Shisho and enter a state of meditation. He discovered that it had passed the time admirably and strengthened his mental fortification. However, Chiriku Shisho had always insisted on the completion of the meditations at intervals of 1 hour. Following this, Naruto concluded his meditation after an hour. Only to find that Hitaki Kakashi, this stupid guy, was still nowhere to be found. That did nothing but make him angrier. He had assumed that that stupid Junin would have shown up by the time he finished his meditation, but to his surprise, not only did he fail to show up, but he continued to be absent for nearly an additional hour. Hinata looked over at him and said, "Damn it, this is taking forever." She saw that he had pulled out a shuriken and was fingering it almost nervously. Naruto.kun, what are you going to do with that shuriken? HMPH. A small gift for the fool if he appears at all. Naruto winked and shook it about like a plaything. No worries. If he's really a Junin, then he'll dodge it no problem. If he can't, well, he shouldn't have the title in the first place. From his seat, Sasuke nodded toward the sharp little object. Be that as it may, I don't think that's a good idea. He was clearly annoyed. I don't want there to be a chance that we happen to have killed our Junin. Sensei. Just think about what it'll be like in our records. An annoyance twitched Naruto's eye. He answered, Sasuke. Right now, I wouldn't care if our sensei could be the next Hokage after Gigi retires. He's seriously ticking me off. If a little scare will teach him to get here on time, then I'll definitely do it. The clock began to chime, indicating that it was now 2 afternoon, and the door slid open in perfect time with that clock. With wide eyes, Naruto threw his shuriken at full speed right away. No matter how damned late the guy was, he wasn't really interested in killing him. When the shuriken embedded itself into the door frame directly next to his face, he did not move, suggesting that either he was aware of it or that his reaction was just slow. With a sheepish expression, the man scratched the back of his head, appearing almost dazed. "Yo, you wouldn't happen to be Team 7, would you?" His response was validated by the actual explosion of killing intent that Sasuke and Naruto were producing. Hinata scowled at the man from where she stood, content to appease the irate blonde standing beside her. The Junin pointed idly outside with his thumb, saying, "Ma, no need to be so angry at me. Meet me on the rooftop, we'll continue our little introduction there." As the three reached the roof, Sasuke still frowning and Naruto still complaining, they discovered their sensei relaxing in relative peace. He had been staring up at the sky before turning to face the three of them. The three of them moved over to take the seats right across from the man as soon as he leaned his head in that direction. Kakashi drew lead-eyedly, "Yash. Well, to start, I suppose I should congratulate you on taking a step into your shinobi careers. As a Junin, it will be my job as a commander to our team and an instructor to your progress. To start, why don't we introduce ourselves?" Raising an eyebrow, Sasuke said something. "You go first." All right. Well, my name is Hitaki Kakashi. I have many likes and dislikes, but going over them would be too long and boring. My dream is to, well, I have hobbies. Why did the introduction seem so dull? As he went to introduce himself to the one person who didn't know him, Naruto sighed and shook his head. "Hello, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I enjoy a variety of things. I'd rather not talk about the people I dislike. I guess I should meditate, but I haven't given it much thought. As for my dream..." Naruto's eyes briefly went glassy as he raised his gaze to the sky. "To have a successful life." Kakashi appeared to be pleased with Naruto's introduction, praising him particularly for his passion and dreams. Good job." He was initially hesitant to teach the Kyuubi's jailer, but it didn't seem to be in vain. The boy appears to have a sincere desire to become a successful shinobi. Next, the Junin's gaze moved to the blonde's right, where the boy's gentle prodding caused a rather adorable little Hyuga girl to blush. As she introduced herself, she let out a slow breath. She must be a timid individual. "My name is Hyuga Hinata. My hobbies are going and helping my mother look over our herb garden. I like making different medicines and finding rare herbs. I dislike people who judge before really knowing about others." Hinata gave the blonde a fleeting, barely perceptible glance before turning away. "My dream for the future is to be able to become a good leader for my clan." There seems to be a connection between her and the blonde. Remarkably, it appears that this team will have a respectable medic in the future. That is, if she chooses to pursue her skills in producing medicines and tonics. One can always switch from healing to poisoning, after all. Next, you, the sulking boy. Sasuke scowled in rage as Naruto laughed out loud beside him. With a scowl, he struck the blonde on the arm, to which Naruto responded with a raspberry. The Uchiha gave a frustrated sigh and gave his introduction. "Hello, I'm Uchiha Sasuke. I enjoy training as a hobby and have many dislikes. As for my dream, well, it's an ambition." Sasuke's eyes darkened as he thought of the person who would now only appear in his nightmares. The murderous night beneath the crimson moon. "My ambition is to one day kill a man and to restore my clan to its rightful position." The Uchiha made her announcement, and there was an awkward silence. Naruto and Hinata both averted their eyes, sympathizing with Sasuke for being reminded of his clan's massacre. Despite this, it appeared as though Hitaki Kakashi lacked any empathy whatsoever. He said happily, "Well then, it's a pleasure to meet you all. Well, I suppose now's a good time to tell you that you might not be a genin. At least, you might not be when I'm through with you." Now bewildered, Naruto looked around at the Junin, who had been staring at him for his lack of tact. "Sensei, what do you mean?" Kakashi thought as he rubbed his mask-covered chin, trying to think of a better way to explain what he was going to say. The Junin showed his understanding by snapping his fingers. "Well, Junins by tradition gives a genin team a type of exam of their own, to test their mettle. As we have the overall authority over you guys, we evaluate you people ourselves, and if you don't meet up to our expectation, then we have the power to literally strip you of your title as a genin. After, you can do normal citizen jobs or take the academy again to hope for another year of review." The news wasn't good. They were all three staring in shock at the Junin. It was embarrassing just to think that they would have to give up their titles as genins, especially since they had just about survived a few days ago. Oh, and did I forget to mention? The average rate of success is below 50%. I'd say it's around 34 or so. Yes, that was undoubtedly positive news. Well, that's it for today. Come prepare for your exam with me at Training Ground 7 at 9 in the morning. Kakashi waved to the three and gave them an odd upside down "You," I grinned before leaving. But he came to a stop just in front of the rails. "Oh, I forgot to mention this as well. Don't eat anything for breakfast or you'll be sorry by the time the exam starts." And with that, 3 very confused genins watched as Hitaki Kakashi vanished in a cloud of smoke. Hyuga Hiyashi found the night to be quite exhausting, and ever since then, the night has been the same. The leader of the clan glanced up from his stacks of paperwork and saw the moon's brilliant rays. Its light streamed through the windows, filling his room with enough light that he wouldn't even need the table lamp. But lacked the luxury of immersing himself in the ethereal beauty of the moon. No, not since he made the decision to forego warmth and love that evening. Gradually, Hiyashi averted his gaze from the moon and went back to his documents, which included a report from the council regarding reconnaissance and the subsequent skirmishes from a few of the teams. And yet his mind was already elsewhere. Rather, Hiyashi discovered that he was slipping into the past, recalling the night he lost his cherished wife and how he resolved not to let his daughter become a mirror image of her. He trained her to the breaking point for almost a year, and if she showed signs of weakness, he would punish her severely, literally driving her to the verge of insanity. And why? He had feared that his daughter would turn out exactly like her mother, a woman endowed with a remarkable capacity for compassion in addition to her knightly beauty. Seeing her turn into that, in his opinion, would serve as a continual reminder of his loss and suffering. He was actually more afraid of what might happen to her because of her kindness and compassion, which served as a reminder that he had lost his own wife and 2 other equally kind people. But now he saw it for what it was, a foolish panic attack. Was he even allowed to look his daughter in the eye? Despite having every right to hate him and detest him for putting her through that ordeal, she chose not to do so. His daughter had never once given him a hateful look, not even before Hinako had returned. All she felt was grief and, deep down, forgiveness. After all he had caused her, Hiyashi did not deserve her forgiveness and he would never ask for it, but as a small atonement for the wrongs he had done, he promised to never treat her harshly again. Naturally, that did not absolve him of the events that had transpired. When he discovered that his wife had returned, the severity of his crimes increased. When she inquired about their daughter, the immense happiness that had surfaced upon seeing her and touching her once more vanished instantly. She never did forgive him after discovering what he had done. She remained with him for a while, but he could tell right away that a serious question was beginning to emerge in her mind. It didn't take long to realize that she was curious about his motivation for doing what he did. When the time came for that question, Hiyashi was ready. He had already resigned himself to a life devoid of love and the inability to ever hold his beloved again. He lied to her when she questioned him about his motivation. He informed her he required a powerful heir. Ever since, even though she would never admit it, Hiyashi could sense her natural repulsion towards him. It was impossible for him to hold her responsible. If he were anyone else, he would likewise wish to get away from the man who destroyed his family, Hyuga Hiyashi. He discreetly retired to a different room to quietly rest, driven by this revulsion, so that his beloved would never have to share their bed with him. The room is basic and devoid of many luxuries. The bed itself was just a futon with its end pieces turned up. This room represents his own willingness to live alone. He has been working as much as he could for the past 4 years to try to lessen the pain of never being able to spend quality time with his family. However, he was not flawless, nor was his determination entirely unwavering. Sometimes all he wanted was to be able to hold his wife again, to feel her warmth, and to be a part of a family's joy once more. However, that moment never arrived, and even though there were circumstances that might have given rise to it, he made the decision to avoid it. One of these instances caused his wife to start doubting the purpose of their union, their full-fledged love, and the birth of their daughter. The words that came out of his wife's mouth hurt so much that they shook his already shaky foundation, even though he had already given up on being a true husband and father. After the guilt that flooded through him at every word, he was unable to place the blame on her. But there were a lot of other feelings as well, like envy and rage, in addition to that guilt. She had no experience with pain. Unless she chose not to tell him everything, what she had endured at the hands of the traitor Shannon was insignificant in comparison to what he had endured throughout his life. The moment he killed the Cloud Junin that nearly started a war, the assassination of his mother, the first time he witnessed his father using the seal on his own brother, and his brother's death in order to save him. After that, everything came to an end when his wife was abducted and might have died. That being said, his wife's suffering was insignificant in comparison to his own. Thus, how could she possibly attempt to charge him with anything less than what he had provided? At that moment, Hiyashi lost it and turned away from her, filled only with bitterness and rage. He didn't see her or the two who returned for the entire day that followed. He occupied himself with shinobi force meetings and other village affairs. It isn't until he is in his private studies that he has time to himself and reflect on the day. Hiyashi turned away from the candlelight and closed his eyes tiredly. His body was getting close to its limit, and his mind was overflowing with knowledge. He was tired. He sighed, set the ink brush down neatly on the table, and extinguished the candle. The moon appeared to have sensed his exhaustion as well, since it was obscured by ominous clouds and lost its brightness. The chief of the clan got up from his chair and went to his futon. As he carefully lowered himself onto the thin mattress and pulled the sheets up, he discovered that his fatigue was already starting to catch up with him and that his limbs felt like lead. Even so, Hiyashi discovered that he was unable to fall asleep. Memories and morsels of information crowded his mind. The memories of his 4 years of seclusion from his family blended with the facts of strange goings on in rice country to create a soup that left his mind spinning. Hiyashi should have been sleeping, but he could already feel the first signs of a migraine coming on. It has been happening a lot lately, which is evidence of how much work and stress he had endured for such a long time. He nearly sensed his own exhaustion. He muttered to himself, maybe, just maybe it will be my last time. If it's feasible, I might be able to take a short break. But again, something kept him from nodding off. It came from outside sources this time. He had scarcely noticed the footsteps outside because they were so soft. Hiyashi couldn't bring himself to use his Byakugan. He did nothing but wait as the footsteps approached his room. The person padded into his room as the door slid slowly open. Hiyashi knew who this person was even in the dark. Even though he was blind, he had seen enough of her to know her. Hanako. Stepping forward, his spouse bent down beside him. With how weak he was now, barely able to raise his head, it was almost as if she was visiting a sick patient. Hiyashi. Sama. Hanako moved in closer, whispering to him. She surprised him by reaching out and lightly petting his cheek. I'm sorry. What did I have to apologize for? If anything, she ought to be criticizing him even now. Hanako shook her head and said, I know now. I know why you did it. The fleeting glimmer of light on her cheeks told him she was crying. It took me 4 years, but I finally realized it. Were I in your place, I don't know if I wouldn't have done the same thing. No, Hiyashi averted his gaze. You wouldn't. You are incapable of cruelty. That is what makes us different. To his surprise, she abruptly turned to face him and pulled him back in her direction with her outstretched hands. Hanako touched his forehead tenderly, still in tears. Shouting, You're not cruel. If anything, your heart is too big, and I apologize for ever doubting you. I doubt you were able to grieve when the clan was looking for a strong pillar. You must have been holding it in until I returned, and even then, I did not allow you to rest. She sobbed softly and shook her head. You are my beloved husband, and if given the chance, you would have also been an amazing father. Please forgive me for my foolishness. To be able to feel her again was an incredible feeling. With a sigh, Hiyashi's whole body loosened up. It felt like a huge weight was taken off of him, but it only made him feel more exhausted. He was feeling the strain of deteriorating health now more than ever. Hiyashi watched her slowly straighten up and said, And you've been slowly killing yourself for repentance. At that moment, the moonlight decided to reappear, illuminating her watery smile. You no longer have to. He observed her taking off her yukata as the moonlight beautifully illuminated her exposed skin. As his wife, who had not lost a trace of her beauty, undressed and joined him on the futon, Hiyashi was left speechless. With her head resting on his shoulder, Hanako enveloped herself in his embrace. He could almost feel her bare skin touching his own yukata through the fabric, making it seem too good to be true. Hiyashi. Sama, she said, her eyes gleaming with love and guilt at the same time. I love you. Sarutobi Hiruzen smoked slowly from his pipe and fixed his gaze on the 4 stone heads perched atop the Hokage monument, looking proudly over Konoha. The elderly man was reflecting on the situation in the village and the impending conflict that could affect it. In order to reclaim his position as Hokage and return the council to its original role as advisors, he had initially declared martial law in the village. He took this action in response to the severe abuse that young Uzumaki had endured in the past. He made it plain upon his return that any further unfair actions would not be accepted. Restoring wartime authority, however, might have been a wiser decision than he had initially thought. Numerous accounts of Orochimaru's small pet village and its unexpected population boom have already surfaced. It was inconceivable that the estimated would grow so rapidly all of a sudden, nearly catching up to other shinobi villages in a matter of years. There was a problem. If anything, Orochimaru has figured out a method to either attract more people to himself or age individuals until they are of combat age. Those were the only conclusions that made sense. My faithless student. To think that it would come to this. It was already pretty clear what Orochimaru planned to accomplish with his support. Having been the best of his 3 students, the traitor Sannin was equally knowledgeable in all shinobi techniques. Orochimaru was familiar with all the techniques available in the village, just like him. And the village had nothing left to teach him, no new skills to pick up. Now that his army was expanding, a war with Konoha was just a matter of time. And Sarutobi will spare no effort to get his beloved village ready for that coming conflict. There was a soft thud behind him, signaling someone else. That kind of spiritual chakra was unique to one person, so the old Hokage didn't need to inquire as to who it was. Shuriku-san. To what do I owe the honor? The monk, who appeared to be his own son's sworn brother, bowed respectfully to the Hokage. Hokage. Dono, as you have already requested, the final preparations for the seal have been put in place. The basic outline is large enough to cover the capital of Fire Country and much of the southern borders, including Konoha. Hiruzen nodded and said, "Good work. I'm sorry that it took 4 years for you to finish this. It must be hard to part from your temple for that long." "No, please think nothing of it. I was glad to help, and with this seal, we can ensure that the greatest of Orochimaru's destruction cannot harm the capital, Konoha, and my own temple." Orochimaru, a former pupil he greatly admired, had someone 40 years ago predicted that Orochimaru would rank among Konoha's most formidable foes, he would have laughed them off or challenged them to a duel for the audacity to offend him. He was regarded as one of the village's greatest geniuses back then. He moved through techniques as easily as a shark moves through calm waters. They almost seemed like water to him. It would be accurate to say that Sarutobi was extremely proud of the boy for seemingly emerging from his parents' deaths with a remarkable level of recovery and throwing himself into the village's well-being. But then he started to notice something dark was developing inside of him. He occasionally played tricks on his opponents in combat, prolonging pointless skirmishes as though to test a theory. But he always ignored this, not daring to believe that the student he held in such high regard could possibly turn heretical. He made a mistake there. It was true that Orochimaru had started to become more and more vicious, ruthlessly slicing through battlefields with no regrets. Additionally, it was during those times that Konoha residents started to vanish from sight. Hiruzen knew, in a way he did not want to accept, that his student was the one responsible. Thus, when it came time to select a successor, he selected Jiraiya's star pupil Namikaze Minato as the Yondaime. That turned out to be the final straw. Orochimaru did not even bother to conceal his intentions afterward, which prompted a number of inquiries that ultimately revealed many of his underground laboratories. Hiruzen personally witnessed the horrors his pupil had inflicted upon a great number of people. Even a hardened Hokage like himself had fallen and literally emptied his stomach at first sight of them. They were that terrible. Not long after making that shocking realization, he cornered his pupil with the goal of ultimately defeating him. Upon further reflection, he realized that moment may have been the only one in which Orochimaru was most vulnerable. That one moment would have definitely ridden the world of a major evil. However, he paused, perceiving the remaining traces of his pupil in those twisted eyes. To his deepest humiliation, Hiruzen was unable to deliver the final blow. And he might have ended the lives of countless people in that one moment of weakness. His sins would not even be partially consumed by an eternity of torment in Mikai's fiery pits. He had a lot to explain. The Sandaime abruptly stopped thinking and asked, "Hokage, Dono?" Berating himself for being so rude to the person in front of him, he smiled shyly at the monk as he turned back to face him. "Please forgive me. I find myself drifting into the past more and more these days." Shuriku lowered his head, displaying no signs of offense. "No, you have no need to apologize. To prevent mistakes from happening, one must always look back into the past for guidance." With a smile, Hiruzen said, as expected of Master Monk, "While we are on this topic, how goes your teachings on Naruto-kun?" Turning his head to face the Hokage monument, the monk smiled gently. It is safe to say that by now, the boy has a firm grasp on all the concepts involving the taijutsu style. Naruto-kun has definitely improved. I am rather surprised that he can pick up the concepts so quickly. Sometimes it would be a week, sometimes it would be 3 days, and on some occasions, he can learn it right on the spot. It's a little more difficult for him to actually put it to use. He appears to take a lot longer to execute the actual footwork than he does to understand the concepts through analysis. He still has some unsteadiness in his form, and occasionally I give him purposeful openings that are not taken advantage of. Having said that, he is progressing remarkably. I venture to say that he can complete the style in half the time it took me if he keeps going at his current pace. With a smile, Hiruzen turned to face his successor and, sadly, his predecessor. "Of course," he said, Regardless of how you look at it, that boy really does resemble his father. Shuriku looked confusedly over at the Hokage in front of him, and his eyes widened in surprise as he followed the path of the Sandame's smile, which was directed towards a face on the monument. Hokage. Dono, you don't intend to imply that the father of Naruto-kun is genuinely. Indeed. But his true identity needs to remain unknown. Even though his father's name was feared throughout the shinobi world, if rumors circulated that the Yondaime had a child, all of his enemies would turn against him ferociously in an attempt to stop Konoha no Kiroi Senko from returning. It's true that a man as great as him would have many enemies. Shuriku himself had been a mere boy in his teens, yet his father would always praise the man, claiming that the war with stone would end because of him. No, he stood there in bewilderment. Now that the pieces had finally fallen into place, he could see the boy, in later years, greatly resembling the Yondaime. It had, too. His name stretched throughout the entire shinobi world and he became as feared as the Sannin before him. Yondaime. Sama had personally taken out hundreds of Iwa shinobi. His name was so feared that Iwa's commanders had issued a decree to their shinobi subordinates. Anyone facing the yellow flash was to flee immediately. And to think that he would be imparting his strength to the son of a man he considered the embodiment of power. A smile gradually spread across the monk's startled expression. So to think that I will be teaching Yondaime. Sama's very own son, he said, it is a wonderful honor. And one that you must keep to yourself no matter the cost. Hiruzen raised his eyebrows. To teach that boy, knowing his lineage, is a great honor in itself, but to honor the Yondaime's wish and to secretly recognize the boy not for his father's achievements but for his own is the greatest honor you can give to his parents. Before the Hokage, Shuriku bowed low and said, I understand. The Sandame nodded and grinned. The monk soon vanished in a cloud of smoke, probably reuniting with Asuma. Hiruzen grinned at the picture of his heir, appreciating the immense power and sacrifices that had been made in front of him. Yondaime, the will of fire never goes out. Strength is the capacity to accept grief and suffering and turn it into motivation to achieve more. It appears that your son will eventually rise to the top of this village. Be proud of that, my successor. Naruto was seriously considering killing someone at that very moment. That damn Junin was 2 hours late yesterday and now he's 2 hours late again. What the hell is going on with him? Being late once is bad enough, especially when he uses a lame excuse like, lost on the road of life, but to be late twice. Someone is going to get a serious beating. Aside from him, Sasuke was also silently furious, feeling like a complete loser, probably from not having had breakfast, plus the fact that it was unusually warm for Konoha and it was almost noon. Where in the world had their sensei gone? The Uchiha looked up, nonplussed to see the blonde fingering a kunai. Sasuke. Yes. Are you willing to engage in some target practice? Hinata shook her head and did little else to stop Naruto. But Sasuke arched an eyebrow and pulled out a kunai as well, though he eyed the blonde suspiciously. Now that was interesting. Is there a goal in sight? Yes, he should be here in 3, 2, 1, Naruto smiled. When a plume of smoke suddenly materialized in the clearing, Sasuke, who was really only reacting instinctively, threw his own kunai as well, only pausing to curse himself upon realizing who they had thrown it at. Naruto's eyes widened and he flung his kunai straight towards the clouds. As the clouds parted, there was a sound like a clash of steel, and 2 kunais hit the ground with a gentle thud. The 3 genins turned to face their sensei, who was using one hand to scratch his head while holding onto a ladle with the other. Hee. Hey, everybody, Hinata finally decided to ask the question that was on everyone's mind, but the 3 chose not to respond, instead focusing on the steel ladle that was still in the Junin's hands. It seemed to play with them, glinting in the sunlight and knocking back 2 kunais. Anyo. Sensei, how come you own a ladle? This, huh? I was actually making some stew when I remembered that I had to come here, Kakashi said, lifting up the ladle to give a better look. At least they thought he was smiling. I left my house in such a hurry that I didn't even think to drop it. They had never heard such a huge pile of bullshit. Mama. No need to be so worked up, Kakashi said, waving his hands in a non-threatening manner as Naruto's eye twitched and he started reaching for a shuriken. We might as well get started while we're all present. When he was done, the earth in front of him started to rise, taking on the shape of a person as color and features gradually emerged. And Kakashi's clone made its appearance. The 3 genins watched as their Junin instructor carefully took out an alarm clock, set it down on top of a tree trunk, and fell into a lazy pace of seals. Kakashi nodded and jerked a finger towards his clone, saying, You all already know the concept of teamwork, as your teams are all based on those who worked well together in the past. This Iwa Bunshin contains about 5% of my strength and chakra reserves, making it about the same level as a very low Chunin or high Genin. To defeat this clone, you have 3 hours remaining. Think of your careers as over if you are unable to complete them in that amount of time. All 3 of them nodded silently. They had braced themselves for this. The purpose of the previous Genin exam was to identify those who might pass. Now they would be further sifted. Naruto narrowed his eyes, dropped into a martial stance, bending his elbows and clenching his fists, but they had all been through a lot to get to where they were then, and no one was going to back down now. Hinata, to his left, used her Byakugan to enter a taijutsu stance and slowly raise her palm in the conventional Juken form. Sasuke crouched down to his right, his hands poised over the 2 shuriken pouches fastened around his waist. Kakashi held up a hand, and the 3 of them tensed, the seconds stretching into what felt like minutes, to the Genins likely one of the longest 30 seconds of their lives. And when Kakashi lowered his hand, it broke. Start. Sasuke immediately leapt back and launched a barrage of projectiles at the clone. Meanwhile, Naruto had thrown in a couple of kunais and lunged forward. The Kakashi clone deflected every projectile with a kunai of its own, then leapt backward to avoid Naruto's weaponry. The blonde stopped in front of the clone and delivered a sharp blow to its windpipe. Reacting in time to avoid a blow that would have crippled his lungs, the clone grabbed his arm with startling speed and launched the blonde over its shoulder, glancing down to see that Hinata was the new attacker and making sure to avoid blocking the attempted Juken strike to its chin. Grabbing the heiress's arms, it threw her at the recuperating blonde, using the moment to look up and quickly ready himself to catch Hinata, though the momentum sent them both tumbling back to the ground. Taking advantage of the distraction, the clone used this opportunity to put some distance between them. However, it happened to appear directly in Sasuke's path this time. Before it could react appropriately, the Uchiha drove a kunai into its stomach, grinning triumphantly. His happiness was short-lived, though, as the clone's body vanished in a cloud of smoke, exposing a wooden log. Shocked, Sasuke leapt back to a safe distance and focused his attention on the real Kakashi, who was relaxing next to the stump. What? The lethargic Junin shrugged. It doesn't mean it doesn't know techniques just because it's at 5%. It simply can't employ them to the same extent. Naruto's eye twitched once more upon hearing this. Damn it, sensei, he muttered angrily, you could have told us. I thought it was obvious. Naruto gave Hinata a silent, cute blush on her cheeks as she accepted his hand, then shook his head disgustedly as he slowly stood up again. They both stood up and dusted themselves off, and Naruto made a small noise of irritation, indicating that this was going to be more difficult than they had anticipated. Huh? For what reason are you all still gathered here? The clock is still running. With a curse, Sasuke bolted into the direction of the forest, and Naruto nodded to Hinata as the 2 of them swiftly caught up to the Uchiha in their pursuit of the elusive clone. At last the sun had triumphed over the clouds, sending glorious beams of light back into the village, bathing Konoha in warmth and brightness and replenishing the energy of those who desired it. Hanako, however, was not one of them. It had been one of those days when she'd wished the warmth and light of the sun were obscured by clouds, if only so she could stay where she was for a little while longer. The matriarch of Hyuga slowly opened her eyes, accustomed to the light streaming in from the windows, and wanted to moan, because the day was calling her to rise and cease her sleep, even though her childish desire was to remain in bed. With a tiny sound of irritation at the sun's glare, Hanako adjusted her posture, slowly lifted her head, and grinned as she looked at her husband's expression, which was silent. Hyuga Hiyashi was still asleep, no doubt tired from meeting after meeting and report after report. It must have been a burden to have to put on that front for everyone, to keep up the appearance of a strong clan leader. When she thought back to how horrifying it had been to see him without that aura, her smile faded. She was already aware of her significant contribution to his extreme pain and weariness. She could only feel self-loathing for his terribly weakened state now that she had really opened her eyes to him again. She felt guilty again for the coldness she had shown him, essentially letting him drown in his work for the previous 4 years. Hiyashi-sama, I promise not to let you go again, she whispered as she slowly raised her head and lowered her mouth to kiss him. I swear. The mother of the family rose slowly from the relative warmth of the futon and shivered instantly, forgetting that she had slipped off her clothes when she got into bed with her husband. Nothing happened that night because he had fallen asleep pretty quickly, but it was still a little awkward to think back on that slightly careless moment. Hanako hurriedly located her abandoned yukata and slipped back into it. Hanako yelled in surprise as something pulled her down before she could even wrap the warm clothes around her body. She winced a little as her body fell back down, and she stiffened for a split second as she felt arms encircling her nude body. She slowly looked up and smiled at her husband, who met it with a single sleepy eye, but soon she relaxed, remembering that it was her husband who was in this room with her. "Good morning, Hiyashi." "Sama." Hiyashi wrapped his arms around him and drew her in close, saying, It was a good morning until you left my side. It became uncomfortably cold after." Hanako's smile vanished, if only momentarily, as Hiyashi's admission revealed a lot about him and his feelings toward her when he slept alone and away from their cozy bed. She forced herself to smile again, though, because she could not let him see her always feeling guilty. That would only make them both feel worse, and she sank back into his embrace. The smile reappeared as she sensed his hands removing the yukata and following her body. "Hiyashi. Sama, are you free today for meetings? None are important enough that a day's delay would matter. How about the rest of the clan, Hanabi included? If we were gone for so long, wouldn't they become suspicious? They should know better than to barge in here if the two of us are missing." Hanako closed her eyes and groaned with pleasure at the feel of his lips, since it had been so long since she had felt those lips on her own, kissing her in the one way that only Hiyashi knew how. But before Hanako could finish, Hiyashi silenced her with a kiss, one that he had not had the luxury of giving in a long time. Hiyashi eventually withdrew, leaving his wife staring up at him with a slack, satisfied smile on her face and unfocused eyes. He whispered, "No more questions." As her husband pulled the sheets over them, Hanako could only nod. She closed her eyes, sighing with pleasure as Hiyashi brought the two of them into a steady pace of need and enticement. One word would describe Team 7's feelings about this test: frustration. Although the clone was genuinely weak in that its attacks lacked power, attacking it was both annoying and pointless due to its extremely tough surface, constant running away, and traps it laid. The only time they had really advanced was when all three of them combined extremely complex attacks, and even then, it had only managed to temporarily knock the clone unconscious by causing it to stumble. That fleeting triumph was dashed when the clone used an odd trick that made it completely vanish, forcing the three of them to start looking for it again. The clone alone bears witness to the strength and fighting ability of their Junin Sensei. For all its 5% strength, it had managed to elude them for the better part of their 3 hours, and on the few occasions when they had succeeded in flushing it out, it had put up a good fight before vanishing once more before they could overwhelm it. Their Junin Sensei was truly unlike any other shinobi, but that did not lessen their annoyance. How in the world can a mindless rock clone fight like this? Damn it! Naruto panted, worn out from the never-ending tracking and fighting. Sasuke and Hinata weren't doing any better next to him. Aside from some minor chakra exhaustion from using his fireballs a few times, Sasuke had a few bruises on his arms and wrists from where the clone had struck to disarm him. Right now, he was going through his weapons pouch, counting the kunais and shurikens he still had. What was left of them was very little. Hinata was also slightly injured, just a small cut from where the clone had slashed at her. It had been much bigger and bleeding before, but it had healed pretty quickly after she'd applied some of her medicinal cream over it. It was now mostly covered and would heal completely in a few hours. She was currently using her Byakugan to scout the area, searching for any signs of the elusive clone. It was less than an hour to go. Sasuke shook his head and got up from where he was, saying, "Only about 15 kunais and 30 shurikens left in total. We have to take it out soon or we'll be completely out of weapons." "Do you see the clone anywhere, Hinata?" The youthful heiress gave a headshake. "The clone still has not entered my field of vision," Hinata murmured, "and we only have about 40 minutes left." They all wanted to pass this test, so that was not good news at all. Oh my god. This isn't right in any way. How can a clone with only 5% of the strength of the original fight with such vigor? You would think that such a low chakra supply would mean that it'd disappear real soon, Naruto said, squinting his eyes at the trees in the area. It's been over 2 hours, and even though it's only been using Kawarimi and some basic chakra control techniques, it should have vanished by now, grunted Sasuke as he nodded. This should not be feasible unless Kakashi Sensei has a vast supply of chakra. And that was the root of the issue. While Kakashi was undoubtedly a Junin, his reserves shouldn't be so great that a clone with a negligible percentage could survive as long as it did. Something wasn't quite right, and Kakashi was only calling it an Iwabunshin to fool them and take their minds off of other issues. However, what could it be that Kakashi Sensei created something that sustains the clone's life? The young Hyuga heiress, blushing at the seemingly ridiculous idea, was staring at Naruto and Sasuke at the same time, about to stammer out her apology when Naruto interrupted. You know, I wouldn't put it past that guy to make something like this. Sasuke agreed with his nod. He made the clone and gave out a half-truth so that we'd focus our attention only on defeating the clone, diverting our attention from the real purpose of this exam. With a smile, Naruto said, "Hinata, you rock." Ah, she couldn't help but look down in embarrassment when Naruto complimented her, making her face suddenly heat up and feeling as though her heart had swelled to almost 3 times its original size. How could he make her feel this way so easily? Hinata shook her head quietly. "No, I can't think about these things in the middle of an exam. I have to be able to pass before I can think about these things." Closing her eyes, Hinata channeled chakra again, and felt the veins around her eyes swell with the increased flow of blood and chakra, giving her eyes the energy they needed. When the heiress opened her eyes again, she saw her Byakugan activated. Her range was not as great as many of the Hyugas in her clan, but it was still adequate to cover a maximum of 60 meters, the radius around which they had had the greatest number of encounters with the rock clone. "I need to locate the seal, so find it." As Hinata scanned the surroundings of the trees, rocks, and other vegetation in search of a potential energy source for the clone, her vision flew by them. Hinata noticed a faint glow and focused on a dense bush that seemed to be radiating more energy than it could have. The bush vanished from her field of vision, and underneath was a complex seal with the character, Earth, written in its center. Hinata smiled, relieved to have discovered it. About 50.6 meters away, at a direction of 30 degrees west, is a small bush. Beneath it is a seal with the word, Earth, written in kanji in the middle. This seal could be the one providing the clone with energy. With a nod, Naruto gestured for everyone to assemble, and as soon as they were close enough, he started to sketch out a loose diagram on the ground. All of us can presume that Kakashi Sensei's clone will be in that vicinity. It makes sense to anticipate that there would be some challenges. I have a plan, but we only have about 40 minutes left, and if anything, it will take us at least half that time to finish this, Naruto said, hardening his gaze and pointing to a single location in his diagram. Everyone pays attention. Kakashi had learned early on that easy missions could hide a more sinister nature and that it would be prudent to stay paranoid rather than to completely become enamored with it. He was nothing if not prepared for anything. Even if he were to enter a D-rank mission, he would carry a multitude of weapons and other needed equipments just in case this mission were to turn awry. His interactions with people follow the same rule. He was aware, for instance, that the 3 genins were merely inexperienced rookies with skills not all that different from those of regular genins, but he had also taken the time to evaluate their mental aptitude, determining whether or not they were ready for the kind of things that a shinobi's job would require of them. As Uzumaki and Uchiha had already experienced a great deal of violence and bloodshed, they passed right away. In fact, Uzumaki Naruto's report mentioned so many traumas that he doubted the boy was not a little too qualified for his position on the team, should it ever pass. However, he ignored it, focusing more on the one who had never experienced violence in her life. Hyuga Hinata, the heiress to the Hyuga clan, the most illustrious group in the village, second only to the Hokage and his 2 advisors in positions of power. Upon first appearance, it was evident that the young heiress had not experienced the same level of trauma as the boys, and that she had probably lived a relatively sheltered life. However, he also noticed that there seemed to be an unnatural quality to the Hyuga, one that nearly made its apparent innocence seem false. Upon further examination of her records, he discovered that she had already been made aware of the existence of the Kyuubi. And that's when he realized. Hyuga Hinata had no deep impression of fear until that one moment, but for someone like Uzumaki Naruto, who suffered from both the citizens of Konoha and Orochimaru's experiments, the trauma would leave a deep impression into his being, hardening his soul to the world in a way that a shinobi would need. She had never felt such pure terror as she did that night when she came into contact with the Kyuubi and its hideous intent to kill. She eventually developed a shell against the outside world, as is natural when one's reflex is to conceal one's actual fear, and since she started to resemble a shinobi after that encounter, there's a good chance that the demon fox is the source of her fear. However, Uzumaki Naruto himself seemed to be almost completely unafraid. In fact, if anything, her fear strengthened her thrust in the boy's direction. That's when Kakashi realized that Hyuga Hinata's greatest fear was not that the demon would reappear. Rather, her fear was that something of that magnitude could destroy Naruto. Kakashi sighed and turned the page of his book absently. And that fear is what motivates her to become stronger. She will continue to grow as strong as possible to reduce the chance of that ever happening. The Junin cast a sidelong glance at the well-organized alarm clock perched atop the tree stump. Just a few minutes remain. Can they actually complete this exam? It had been about 20 minutes since he had heard the sounds of clashing steel, and ever since then, the forest had grown quiet and he was unable to discern what was happening. Kakashi glanced over towards the forest, where an eerie silence had descended. Had they given up? With an audible snap, Kakashi stopped and closed his book, letting out a small sigh as he slipped it back into his equipment pouch and started walking slowly to the thicket of trees. As their one-day commander, he owed it to them to be there to fail if Team 7 had given up. The forest exploded with chakra as Kakashi's eyes snapped open and he leapt back, gritting his teeth and using his own chakra to glue himself to the ground, as the force was strong enough to create strong gusts of wind. What the heck is this massive chakra? Kakashi gritted his teeth within his mask as the force of the gust assaulted his body. This is insane. Who was able to release this much? The copy ninja knew even as he asked it that only one person in the immediate vicinity could possibly have the reserves to unleash a blast this size. Hey! Kakashi raised his hand to scratch his head in frustration as the gust gradually subsided. I guess they didn't give up after all. After a few minutes, Kakashi saw the three of them leaving the forest, with Sasuke leading the way and carrying the evidence of their triumph. A book called Icha Icha Paradise that had become slightly soiled. Beside him, the Hyuga helped steady him as he walked. She didn't even bother to acknowledge him as all of her attention and worry was fixed on the boy in her care. Naruto looked out of breath and Hinata helped support him, which should not come as a surprise as the amount of chakra unleashed must have been roughly equivalent to 6 of his Raikuras. The blonde looked up and met his gaze for a moment before giving out a tired smile. Kakashi was not sure if he should be humbled or insulted. The Genins came to a stop in front of him, waiting for their assessment. The Junin rubbed his chin thoughtfully, taking in their appearances and the spot where the chakra explosion had occurred as he looked at the three, shifting his gaze from face to face until it settled on the book that Sasuke was holding out. He concluded by snapping his finger, saying, "You all look like crap." The responses came right away. The Junin's lack of tact caused Naruto's eyes to arch an eyebrow. Hinata, who remained at his side, turned and scowled at him in reproof. And Sasuke threw the book in his direction with an irritated expression. "Well, you three managed to defeat the rock clone at the very least," Kakashi said, carefully brushing off the dirt from the book. "I'd like to know how you accomplished this. That significant chakra explosion definitely piqued my interest. Please tell me how you defeated my clone." "We instantly came up with a plan when we guessed that your clone might actually have had an alternate supply of energy outside of yourself." Naruto smiled and nodded his head in the direction of the trees. "We took our time looking for the clone. Once we found it, Hinata and Sasuke, along with about 20 of my clones, diverted its attention. They drove it to the inner regions of the forest and my clones prevented it from returning back to where it was. As soon as it was clear, I came to where the seal was hidden and poured all of my chakra into it, breaking the seal. This was an easy plan. However, it could be very effective if the right people were assigned to the task. However, upon hearing the plan, Kakashi was troubled by one thing. How were Sasuke and Hinata with a mere escort of 20 clones being enough to stop my clone? Granted, it only has a limited amount of intelligence but it still has about the same taijutsu style and fluidity as myself. Not that I doubt the two of your strengths but my clone should have been able to elude you easily." Hinata responded with a tiny smile and a shake of her head. "That's your mistake, Kakashi. Sensei. Naruto. Kun's clones weren't fighting yours, they were spread out in a circle to help power a containment seal." He grunted and grinned, adding, "And since your clone couldn't use high-powered techniques, the barrier was enough to stop it." Sasuke was done talking. Using a barrier seal, that's how they went about it. However, Genins should not learn about seals until they were nearly at the end of their Chunin years. So how did Naruto manage to master the complex use of seals? Observing the Junin's silent inquiry, the blonde simply smiled. "Chiriku. Shisho taught me some things on seals. I'm not that great yet but I'm learning." Chiriku. Sama. That certainly opened my eyes. This was not explained to Kakashi, who would have guessed that Naruto's master was none other than the notorious Chiriku of the Thousand Fists. Fascinating. Well, do we pass or not? Kakashi looked at all three of the Genins and their somewhat pallid appearance, then rubbed his chin. Then, before turning to face the book he was holding, he took a quick look at the clock, which was still not ringing. There were clumps of wet dirt inside the hardcover book. "Sorry, you all fail." After hearing the copy ninja's report through to the end, Hiruzen let out a moan. It was the first time Kakashi had passed the team, but it also seems that he slightly infuriated them. Naruto had started cursing him and hurling his remaining shurikens at him, according to Kakashi. Naruto had other ideas after the Junin avoided them all and grabbed onto the boy to restrain him. Then, he had sunk his teeth into Kakashi's arm, creating a noticeable bite mark, suggesting that he wished to make a lasting impression on the Junin. That being said, there were no other concerns. He gave a nod of gratitude to the Junin, who quickly disappeared with a cloud of smoke. After receiving the final report, Hiruzen turned back to the few documents his shadow clones had left behind. The reports and words that drew his attention caused his eyes to narrow. The land known as Fang Country, which was the most powerful military force among the 5 great countries, had been totally destroyed. 95% of the population was wiped out when the villages burned. The capital, which was formerly regarded as one of the world's most impregnable regions, was reduced to ruins. According to the reports, the survivors stated that all of this had been done by just about 300 marauders. It should be nearly impossible to have such feat. With thousands of shinobi in service, Konoha could not have possibly conquered a nation as powerful as Fang or the 5 great nations. So how did 300 people accomplish what thousands could not? A report on the soldiers caught the Hokage's attention. According to one, none of those raiders had been wounded by swords or arrows. Indeed, it appeared as though they had fallen from the sky, showering their soldiers with death. According to one of these reports, the marauders' skins were all incredibly hard, to the point where their blades would only pierce the skin slightly. Someone else mentioned that the raiders appeared to have taken weapons from their own limbs and were energized by chakra. They were all dressed in red and black. Marauders coming down from the sky, with weapons taken from their own bodies and hardened skins. The Hokage said, closing his eyes briefly while he combed through his memories to find a likely explanation. Over his years as a shinobi, he had come across a variety of situations and distinct traits in his adversaries. One such instance occurred roughly 40 years ago when he engaged in combat with a Kagaya clan member. The man had been a vicious man who had broken bones from his own body and used them as weapons. However, he had also discovered that the Kagaya tribe had been obliterated. It's possible that these reports have to do with puppets. However, who could manage hundreds of puppets simultaneously? That is not possible. Hiruzen opened his eyes again, taking a quick look at the report. He turned a few pages, reading the lines quickly until he came across one of these reports. The marauders' weapons were all covered in incredibly strong poison. Some even sent clouds of poison into villages, completely eradicating the inhabitants. How awful. He turned the pages further until he came across the insignia that some soldiers had mentioned. It showed a single red scorpion in the center of a black triangle. Scorpion? Where had he previously seen that insignia? Hiruzen carefully pulled out a small black book from a drawer. After turning a few pages, he came across the same red scorpion. The image of a young, red-haired man with an expression of indifference appeared beneath it. Akasuna. No Sasori. His aged eyes grew wide with dismay. The notorious Sasori of the Red Sands was the one who destroyed Fang Country. The man was notorious in Konoha already. Sasori, after all, was the mastermind behind the sabotage that made White Fang, the fabled warrior from Konoha, give up on the mission in order to save his friends. Hiruzen had never forgotten how that mission had turned out. That day, Konoha lost a lot of shinobi. Hiruzen sighed, closing his eyes, and he has now struck again. Kakashi must not know of this, not yet. With care, the Sandame returned the bingo book to its drawer and set the report aside. He had a lot on his mind. And it didn't seem like he would have much of that time. Abruptly, there were knocks on the door. With a raised eyebrow, Sandame nonetheless said, "Yes." The doors creaked open slowly, and out of the crack came the familiar sight of unkempt blonde hair. Hiruzen smiled kindly at the boy. He'll set the report aside for now. Naruto-kun, I heard that you passed your genin trial. Congratulations. The blonde entered and sat down in front of the wise old man, nodding absently. It was strange enough that he looked nervous, but he declined the offer of drinks politely. Gigi, can I ask a favor for you? The Hokage gave a nod. Well, you were there 4 years ago when Hanako-san asked to adopt me. You remembered my conditions, right? He nodded once more. Simultaneously, he pulled open a second drawer and carefully took out a key. I'm a genin and that means that I should be an adult now. Well, I passed the exam. He appeared a little uneasy, as though the idea of leaving the Hyuga household wasn't at all appealing. And, I want to be independent now. I can't be relying on the Hyugas forever. Hiruzen clasped his hands together and asked, Are you sure? The Hyugas never had a problem with your presence and it would seem that Hanako-san, Hanada-san, and Hanabi-san are all very fond of you. Yes, Naruto said, biting his lip. I know, but I'll always feel I'm imposing into their family. I don't fit in no matter how hard they try to let me do so. Sandame extended his hand and showed the key, saying, I see. Then if you're absolutely sure, this is the key to your new home. Naruto accepted it, but he just gawked at it. He raised his head to meet the third Hokage's gaze. With a smile, Hiruzen met the unspoken question that was already bubbling up in the blonde's eyes. I did not buy the home. It was the former home of a dear friend of mine, who wanted to leave it in your care. I had every intention of one day presenting this home for you. He wanted to remain anonymous until you became old enough to figure out for yourself. Wondering, Naruto took the key. Both of them stared at the key and at the boy for a few minutes without saying anything to each other. When the young blonde finally looked up, he posed his query. This friend, did he know me well? Gazing at the boy, Hiruzen noticed the similarity right away. His eyes landed on the picture to his side, where the serious expression of another blonde met his gaze, and his face slowly split into a sad smile. Yes, was his quiet response. He knew you well.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.